trivia from the audience, and these are some things that you probably don't know about Ruth, but you're going to find out. So first of all, Jan Johnson, where are you sitting?
Right here.
Oh, I don't think a cord runs far enough.
I better go.
There's a cordless on the table next to Ruth.
Right next to Ruth here. Okay.
Here you go.
I'm not telling everything.
Oh, come
All
on.
right, there are just two things. This isn't on, is it?
Yes.
Okay, there are just
Hold it
two
closer.
things. One is, did any of you ever slept in the same room with
Hold
Ruth?
it closer to your mouth.
Has any one of you ever slept in the same room with Ruth? Well, Jeff knows. Talk about snoring. I spent a few days with her back in the 80s when we were in London and Paris. And I finally had to get up and say, Ruth, I've got to turn over, I'm going to kill you. And the other thing is something that I want to get straight with you before either of us get any older. I am reported to have said to you, you inconvenience people and don't feel guilty. That is not true. I did not say that. I said, Ruth, you are the only person I have ever known who does not feel guilty being pampered.
Sue Wright has something to say also.
Ruth, I basically just, something I'm really curious about and thinking, and you're going to need your mic there in a minute, but this whole queen thing, were you born to a royal family?
Well, not in the traditional sense.
Then what is it that makes you think you're a queen?
Well, I have a very closest possible authority.
What is that right?
My pantyhose. They say I'm a queen, and I believe it.
Aren't we glad this is not show and tell? Sue Voss has a little story she'd like to share.
Well, I'm very sorry George is not here because I'm sure George would have an opinion on many things, those of you who knew George. And I've got a lot of stories about George, but we'll talk about those at the bar later. Anyway, one of George's favorite stories is the time Ruth was driving in the Drake area and called George at the office saying, "Where is the car?" George said, "Why?" Ruth, "I need it." George, "Why?" Ruth, "Well, I totaled mine and I'm late for a hair appointment." I won't tell you what George said after that.
And now Kay Henderson has something.
I love microphones. I have a question. Does Ruth like jewelry?
Nah. Never wears it.
Never wears it?
No, in fact,
Unadorned is what you're saying.
yeah, and in fact, she hates anything sparkling. Never mind.
Unless it's liquid. So, my other question, I play euchre. Does Ruth play euchre or bridge?
She played bridge. She plays it all the time. In fact, I don't know how she had time to do all these things over here, but she found time. Ruth has some friends who traveled all the way from Oregon to be here today, and they are, just a minute here, Sissy and Paul Levine. Phil! I say that every time. Phil, you should become Paul, so I can call you Phil. You're back there. Do you have something you'd like to say?
It's been more than 50 years since Ruth and of course George befriended Sissy and me and introduced us to the in-crowds at both Drake and in the city of Des Moines. Essentially, they mentored us, starting when I was a graduate student, came to Drake, and ending, of course, when I became Professor Emeritus, God knows, years later. They put us up, and they put often up with my polite and non-polite jokes, helped me spread the laughter and cheer, and buffered us from the pitfalls of Midwestern life. We remember the happiness of celebrating Ruth and Sissy's birthday in October, of the bad days of my hospitalization and George's heart attack. On Friday afternoon, late afternoon, the four of us would go quietly for a dinner to just wrap up the week, and we remember looking at that. It was very quiet. And of course, George's retirement, and what a blast that was. We are so glad that you invited us to come here. We wouldn't have missed it for the world. And Sissy and Ruth, on your birthday, Sissy and I wish you love and health and friends, love to share, health to spare, and friends to care. Happy birthday, dear.
Thank you, Bill. And there's somebody else who would like to say something. Let me see. Ray Cornell, where are you sitting? See, Ruth, you have so many people, friends here, that there's hardly room for others to get through the aisles.
After all those accolades, I don't quite know how to say this, but I'm the guy who took Ruth Mosier to Alcatraz. I served with Ruth for 11 years in the Ombudsman's office. I was the prison ombudsman. And for about half that time, she was my direct boss, working in what was then an even more macho area of government than it is today. But Ruth was extraordinary in many ways. From the very beginning, she told me, she said, I'll never ask you to do anything that I won't do myself. And I thought to myself, oh, that sounds like a crock. But not long after that, I had to do some very serious interviews in Cell House 20 at the old Fort Madison Penitentiary. And Ruth said, well, I'm going with you. Cell House 20 would be the equivalent of a jail in a prison. This is where the bad, bad folks are. When Ruth and I walked in there together, without a guard escort, just the two of us, the whispers began. There's a woman in the cell house. There's a woman, there's a woman. Well, yeah. But I want you to know that she told the truth. She never asked me to do one thing that she wouldn't do herself. And you don't find that in many people of any gender, but certainly a woman trying to make her way in that particular corner of the world was and is an exceptional person. Now, it wasn't all quite like that. There was a case, for example, at Rockwell City, where we knew we were going to be confronting a couple of very dangerous female inmates, and there were two of us, myself and another deputy with Ruth, and as we walked up the sidewalk, she looked at the both of us and she said, when we go in there, we're going to look like a sandwich cookie, and I'm the filling. That's exactly how that worked out.
Thank you.
Is Hank here? Oh, Hank, would you like to come up a minute? This is a surprise to you, Ruth. Hank and Jeff were childhood friends.
Sleeping well, Ruth. Congratulations on a life well lived and your 90th birthday. It's quite a feat. So I'm here as a friend of her son, Jeff, who just sang beautifully for us. And that's my connection to the Mosier family. Jeff was one of my dearest and best friends as a youth growing up. We played football together, and I remember Jeff starting with bands and singing, and so that was a big influence on my life. And if it wasn't for Jeff and some of my other friends, Judd Mayer and Jim Parker, the J Boys, I called them my three best friends, of course, Tom McConnell, who were in theater at Roosevelt, I never would have embarked on my career in the dance, and I never would have met this fine young fellow, Lloyd Von Hagen, who's been a dear, dear friend of mine for a long time. So I owe Jeff Mosier a great deal of a debt of gratitude for being my friend, and an extension, Ruth and George, for being kind to me and allowing me in their home. So I'm very fond of you, and thank you for all you've done for me. And that's what I'm saying.
I remember Ruth saying to me that Hank used to be over at the house playing, and it was dinner time, and he maybe had hot dogs, and she'd say, "We're having hot dogs for dinner, Hank. You want to stay?" And he would stay. And sometimes she'd say, "We're having pork chops tonight, Hank, but I only have 4, so you're going to have to go home and eat."
I have a confession to make. It's been 50 years, but I owe you an apology, I suppose. It was me and a few of my friends who teepeed the heck out of your back tree in your backyard. We did. It was the most fun I ever had in my entire life. I laughed for 3 days and it was great fun, but I have to confess it was me, so.
I had to take it down.
You probably weren't laughing near as much as Hank. Right now, Dr. Jack Jenkins has written a poem in honor of Ruth. So Jack, you want to come up?
Here we go. Don't take the doctor too seriously. When I got the degree, my students said, "It does not entitle you to give physical examination." Yes. Well, before the poem, if you have a celebrity or royalty, it's inevitable that rumors will circulate, and some of them are not true. So I have a few true and false questions to see how well you know Ruth. True and false. As a young girl, she studied tap dancing. In Hebrew, Ruth means princess of fine character. In Obsidian slang, the word Ruth means she who likes big earrings. Unable to get out of a soap-slippery bathtub, she was rescued by the Iowa National Guard. True. They slipped in very quietly, and Dan gave him a glass of wine afterwards. Ruth taught economics at Drake. Okay. Ruth was expelled from Roosevelt High School for smoking in the girls' toilet. Ruth once had Shirley Temple curls. Ruth tried to convince the Mormon Tabernacle Choir to sing at Scottish Rite Park for $200. Ruth has been looking for a place to bronze her tap shoes into Birkins. Okay, here's the poem. It's called Lady Dynamo. Her essence is energy. Whether chemical or electrical or digital, she is fully charged and never stops. She is a a veteran of every philanthropic cause, and is on speaking terms with everybody in Des Moines. She taught the president of Drake how to run Drake. The CEO of SRP consults her regularly, and the Pope is considering canonization. Bless her for her good deeds, and that keeps coming, and with all this, she has enough juice left to be charming and clever and funny, our own energized bunny.
Where's Bruce? Oh, Bruce. I think we want to thank Bruce now for playing the music while you were sitting. So I think now is the appropriate time for us to sing Happy Birthday to Ruth. And Jeff, do you want to lead us? You can lead us. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Ruth. Happy birthday to you. Now, the King, George, was in the counting house, counting out his money. The Queen, Ruth, was in the parlor, eating bread and honey. But while this was going upstairs, the downstairs crew was busy getting this party together. And so I think they should stand, and you've already heard from them, but stand once more. Jan, and Sue, and Kay. Ruth, do you have a few words you would like to say now?
Probably more than you want to hear.
Oh, no, we
A couple of things I want to correct. Thank you, Ray, for the nice things you said. Could have been a lot worse. Anyway, what happened when we walked into that cell house and they said, it's a woman, it's a woman, it's a woman. And you keep hearing that as I go down the cell block. And I said to Ray, God, I hope they hadn't noticed. And the other thing is, my Aunt Peggy left early. She had to leave, and I'm so sorry because I wanted to introduce her. My Aunt Peggy was my very best friend when we were little kids, and she's always been a part of my life. She was a bridesmaid at my wedding. She's always dear to my heart. She will always be part of my life. And my Uncle Fred. Uncle Fred, stand up. My Uncle Fred has always been really special to me. He was in the thickest of the World War II battles, and as a Purple Heart veteran, and this little guy is a real hero to me. Now, the other interesting thing that I always remembered about Fred is that his son, who brought him here today, during World War II, the son was 3.5 years old before Fred ever saw him. That's how things were during World War II. Anyway, I didn't want that to go unsaid. Thank you so much, everybody. I love you all. I really do. I love your being here. Thank you.
I show a movie here every other Thursday night, and recently I just showed the movie Anastasia. And in it, Ingrid Bergman plays Anastasia to Helen Hayes' grandmama. And she's presenting Anastasia to the crowd of royal people downstairs. And in the meantime, Anastasia has run off with her lover. And so Grandmama's aide is standing there beside her, and he says, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? She's gone. She's gone. What about all these people out here? What about all of the people? And Grandma says, I will simply tell them, the party's over. Go home. The party's over, but you don't